They stood hand in hand at the dais' edge, petals scattered in the courtyard and drifting across the worn stones. Though war pressed ever closer, Jon Snow and Margaery Tyrell found a fragile moment of peace in the aftermath of the reaffirmation ceremony. Lords and knights of the Reach joined men sent by Robb Stark, cheering in subdued but genuine approval. The hush that followed was charged with possibility. A hush that might herald the forging of an alliance powerful enough to change the shape of the conflict engulfing the realm. Jon gently squeezed Margaery's fingers. Her eyes, bright with tears held in check, told him that she felt the same swirl of emotions. Around them, sunlight gilded the stone arches of Highgarden, and the orchard's fragrance drifted on the warm breeze. It was a place that seemed designed for beauty rather than bloodshed. Yet the clang of swords, the presence of armed guards, and the endless dispatches detailing troop movements reminded everyone that warfare lurked beyond these cultivated walls. In the front row, Catelyn Stark watched with a measured smile, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes as well. For her, the ceremony honored more than just two young people's vow. It symbolized the uneasy hope that her son Robb, the king in the north, might find the partner he needed in House Tyrell to stand against the Lannisters. Some of her sorrow eased as she observed Jon's posture. Taller than she had remembered, weathered from his trials, but standing firm. The boy who once lingered in Winterfell's shadows now strode with a sense of purpose. When Margaery stepped down from the dais, the crowd parted in a polite wave. Jon followed close, smiling faintly in response to the occasional nods of support. On the platform, Lady Olenna Tyrell and Lord Mace Tyrell conferred quietly with the scribes who had overseen the drafting of official documents. They would soon finish copies of the alliance, set down in the presence of the old gods and the new, validated by noble witnesses from both the North and the Reach. Diplomacy sealed in ink might prove more enduring than any feast or fanfare. As the midday sun climbed higher, servants guided the assembled guests into the great hall for a modest reception. There would be no grand feast. War demanded caution in all things, but the tables were set with fresh bread, cold meats, and pitchers of minted water and fine wine from the arbor. Fewer than 100 souls attended, but Margaery insisted on a welcoming atmosphere. She glided through the crowd, exchanging words of thanks. Jon was never far behind, stepping in when she introduced him to a lesser lord or southern knight who had once doubted his authenticity. They lingered at a table where Lady Alice Beesbury stood, an older woman known for her sharp tongue. Alice offered Margaery a quick curtsy and turned her full attention on Jon. "Lord Snow," she said, eyes narrowed in appraisal. "The realm has changed since you first came to Highgarden, has it not?" She used a tone that might have been condescending if not for the faint tremor hinting at underlying nerves. Jon dipped his head. He was not a lord by name, but courtesy demanded certain forms. "It has changed for us all, my lady." Alice pursed her lips. "Indeed, we Beesburys have long served House Tyrell, but these are uncertain times. My hope is that your bond with Lady Margaery brings unity, not more strife." She studied Margaery for a moment. "Take care, child. Our beloved orchard blooms in summer, but it can wither if war cuts off the Mander's lifeblood." Margaery matched the older woman's concern with quiet resolve. "We will protect the orchard and the people who tend it. The alliance with the North stands for more than just banners in the field. We seek an end to needless bloodshed." Alice gave a reluctant nod before drifting off to join others. Jon, exhaling, let his shoulders loosen. "That was less scathing than I expected," he murmured to Margaery. "She seems frightened by the war's toll rather than resentful of me." Margaery nodded, her eyes flicking around the hall. "Many in the Reach worry about feeding the armies. If battles devour the countryside, the orchard might see ruin. We must move carefully." The conversation ebbed as Lady Olenna beckoned them from across the room. Jon and Margaery parted the crowd, trailing behind them Catelyn Stark, who had noticed Olenna's gesture as well. They formed a small circle near a sideboard stacked with fresh fruit. Olenna's eyes darted between them. "Let us not linger in half measures," the old woman said softly. "We have an alliance to finalize, but also logistics to discuss." If the Lannisters catch wind that the Tyrells have allied with the North, they might lash out swiftly. Our garrisons must be ready. Catelyn spoke with calm precision. Agreed. Lord Tywin Lannister remains a formidable commander. Though my son has won victories in the Riverlands, we cannot be sure how Tywin will respond to a second front opened by the Reach. We must coordinate. Part of why I'm here is to finalize the details of joint operations or the possibility of cutting off King's Landing from the harvest. Olenna tapped her cane, leaning forward. Yes, the harvest. The crown depends on our grain. If we close off the Mander's shipping routes, the capital might face shortages. That could break the Lannisters' grip without a protracted siege, but it also risks angering the small folk or turning them desperate. Jon inclined his head. Desperation might breed chaos inside King's Landing, which could be used against the Lannisters. But we must also ensure they don't try to raid your farmlands in retaliation. Margaery's features tightened with worry. Any blockade or embargo might force the Lannisters to act sooner, but we can't keep letting them enjoy free supplies. If we are at war, we must accept some measure of risk. Our objective is to end the war, not prolong it. Olenna's gaze flicked to Catelyn. We'll put that in the official strategy. Meanwhile, House Tyrell can muster a large force near Bitterbridge. We'll keep it stationed there, ready to move north to join King Robb's army, or to shield the Mander from Lannister raids. It all depends on how the Lannisters respond once they learn of this alliance. Catelyn's eyes gleamed with cautious optimism. Yes, if the Tyrell troops fortify Bitterbridge, that places them in a position to either march on the capital or pivot toward the Stormlands if another threat arises. My son's host currently holds significant ground in the Riverlands. Coordinated movement from both sides might trap Lord Tywin. Margaery let out a measured breath. We must also consider that some of the smaller houses in the Reach remain uncertain. They might fear House Tyrell's shift in loyalty. We must reassure them that this alliance is for the good of the region, not a reckless gamble. Jon nodded, recalling how House Tyrell had nearly thrown its support behind Renly Baratheon before his mysterious death. Once your lesser lords see the practicality of dealing a decisive blow to the Lannisters, they might come around, but we should expect some to hedge their bets. Olenna's mouth curled. Hedging bets is the southern pastime. Still, we hold the main might of the Reach. Others will follow if we show conviction. Let's proceed with the blockade plan. We'll instruct caravans to reduce shipments to the Crown and reroute crucial supplies to our own men or to the north. Meanwhile, we'll finalize the documents. Catelyn, you and I will see to that before the day ends. They agreed. The old woman gave a curt nod, then excused herself. Margaery and Jon exchanged a glance. They had achieved a measure of unity, but the road ahead promised no easy paths. Still, their hearts felt lighter. If the first steps were always the hardest, they had taken them together, forging ahead despite the war's looming shadows. A few hours later, the short reception concluded, and the castle returned to its subdued wartime routine. Scribes worked in small rooms, copying the alliance texts. Soldiers patrolled the walls. Grooms cared for the horses of visiting northern riders. Through it all, Margaery kept close to Jon. After so long apart, the simple act of walking side by side in the corridors was precious. They spoke quietly of everyday matters, castle chores, the orchard's late summer fruit, but never lost sight of the greater storm. In a spare moment near dusk, they stole away from the bustle, finding a quiet parapet overlooking the Mander. Warm lamplight glowed in the windows behind them, but here in the open air, the hush of evening settled. Jon rested his arms on the stone ledge, gazing at the broad river beyond Highgarden's slopes. The water took on coppery hues beneath the setting sun. Ghost dozed a short distance away, tail thumping lazily whenever Margaery drew near. She leaned against Jon, letting her head rest on his shoulder. "It feels unreal," she murmured, voice lost in the gentle sigh of wind. "We were parted so long, trapped in crisis, and now we stand here making plans to defy the Lannisters." Jon turned, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "Life changed so swiftly for us. There are moments I still can't believe I'm free of King's Landing. If not for you and the help of strangers, I might still be in chains or worse. Every day I live now is a gift." Margaery lifted her gaze to his. "We both owe so many. I've prayed each dawn that the gods would guide us, and I see part of those prayers answered. But I worry about tomorrow's battles. Are we strong enough to endure what's coming? Will the realm drown in blood?" Jon's jaw set. "We can't pretend otherwise. The Lannisters have proven they'll kill mercilessly to keep power. Word of King Joffrey's cruelty spreads. My father died for that cruelty, and I fear for your people if the Lannisters strike at the Reach. But it's better to fight with allies than alone." She reached up, touching his cheek. "I'll stand by you no matter the outcome. That vow I made isn't just words. You carry the North in your heart, and I carry the Reach in mine. Perhaps together we can shield both." Silence enveloped them, a tender moment amid the roiling uncertainties. Below, the castle gates opened and shut as another pair of scouts rode out. Jon wished fervently that the war would not devour these fleeting instants of peace. He remembered Ned Stark's wisdom, that each day, men must choose how to face the dawn. Through the worst trials, they held to honor or lost themselves to despair. Now, with Margaery at his side, he resolved never to let despair claim him. He turned to her again, voice hushed. "Will you walk with me in the orchard tomorrow? Show me what's changed since last I saw it." She smiled, delicate yet bright. "Yes, I'd love that. A moment of calm before we fling ourselves into treaties and war councils again." Her expression turned thoughtful. "And maybe we can plan how to reassure the smaller houses. A personal touch might help." "Agreed," Jon said. Then, with a final glance at the fiery sky, they descended the parapet to rejoin the living maze of Highgarden's corridors. Morning brought mild sunshine, and together they roamed the orchard. A few guards followed at a respectful distance, mindful that the realm's chaos could produce assassins or saboteurs, though none seemed likely to appear in the heart of House Tyrell's seat. Margaery wore a light cloak of pale green, modest enough for practicality, while Jon donned simple traveling leathers, the embroidered rose near his left shoulder proclaiming ties to the south. They passed rows of fruit trees and carefully tended flower beds. Late summer blooms painted pockets of color. Salmon-pink petals on drooping stems, honey-gold blossoms that swayed in the warm breeze. Margaery reached out, touching a cluster of pale blossoms as if to reassure herself that beauty still existed outside war's shadow. Jon noted that some of the orchard staff, anxiously at work, paused to bow or smile in greeting. Word of the reaffirmed vow had spread. Ghost padded along behind, occasionally sniffing the grass. One or two orchard lads gaped wide-eyed at the white direwolf. Margaery reassured them that he posed no threat. Jon's presence, once an oddity, was now something of a symbol. The orchard workers seemed curious but cautiously hopeful. Some even murmured blessings that the Union might bring an end to the war. They stopped near a row of apple trees bearing pale green fruit, not quite ripe. Margaery brushed a leaf with her fingertips. "We normally gather apples here for the autumn harvest. If the Lannisters bring war this far, I fear these orchards could be trampled. But with the North behind us, perhaps we can hold them at bay." Jon gazed upward, admiring the dappled sunlight through leaves. "I grew up in a land where winter's chill can kill crops easily, so these trees seem miracles. We must protect them. The small folk need their harvest." A gentle rustle made them turn. Lady Olenna stood a short distance away, leaning on her cane, a pair of attendants shadowing her. She inclined her head. "Am I intruding, children? I had heard you were here. I'd see this orchard for myself." Margaery smiled faintly. "Not intruding at all, grandmother. Are the negotiations proceeding well?" Olenna sighed, stepping closer. "They proceed with Catelyn Stark as a steady hand. We've drafted initial outlines for troop coordination. The northern men stationed here will remain a token presence, but eventually King Robb may send more envoys or a small retinue. Meanwhile, we must keep watch for Lannister spies. Word that the Tyrells and the North have joined forces will spread quickly. We'll see how the Lion responds." Jon nodded. "Thank you, my lady, for helping shape this alliance. It may be our best chance to break the Lannisters' stranglehold. Olenna's gaze flitted around the orchard. I do it for Margaery, for our people, and yes, for the realm, though my cynicism remains. The Lannisters are cunning devils. Don't assume 1 or 2 battles will end them. Margaery's expression turned grim. We don't. We aim to starve King's Landing of supplies, push Tywin Lannister from the field, and hopefully free those who remain captive under Joffrey's rule. She trailed off, recalling rumors that Sansa Stark was still in the capital. Arya Stark's whereabouts remained uncertain. The Lannisters had countless hostages. Olenna nodded, patting Margaery's hand. Well enough, child. Let's hope we can spare the orchard from ruin. It's always a pity when war burns our green lands to ash. She looked to Jon. Carry on with your stroll. I'll hobble back before my old bones give out. She departed, her attendants helping her navigate the winding path. Jon sighed. Every day, it seems we balance hope against grim reality. I wish we had a sign that House Lannister would break sooner rather than later. Margaery slid her arm through his. The realm's wheels turn slowly, but they do turn. Let us be patient, prepared to strike if opportunity arises. They continued, eventually exiting the orchard to cross a broad courtyard where cavalry drilled. The crisp ring of steel on steel, the snort of horses, the barked orders from master-at-arms. These sounds punctured the orchard's gentle calm. Jon recognized House Tyrell's training yard from earlier visits, though now it bustled with thrice the men. He paused at the fence, observing young knights testing each other with wooden lances. Margaery followed his gaze, her brow wrinkled in mild worry. We must ensure these knights remain disciplined. Too many are untested in real war. The battles near King's Landing or in the Riverlands will be no tourney. Jon nodded. Real combat isn't about show or courtesy. I can help train them. I've some experience now fighting Lannister patrols. War taught me lessons no yard can replicate. A swift intake of breath signaled her relief. I think that would help. They respect your skill more so because you survived King's Landing's dangers. If you can instill realism in their training, they'll be less likely to falter in battle. Jon felt a pang, recalling how real that danger had been. I'll do whatever I can. He paused, then pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, ignoring the possible stares from the men. We'll see them ready. Let me speak with your father about it. Margaery's cheeks warmed. He should be in a conference with local lords, but I'll guide you there. The two of them left the courtyard, weaving through corridors that led to a chamber near the council hall. They found Mace Tyrell seated with half a dozen minor lords, reviewing supply ledgers. He waved them in, somewhat flustered, but obviously determined to show leadership in these times. Margaery stood at his side while Jon proposed the idea of offering advanced training to some knights. Mace, relieved to delegate any matter of martial preparation, agreed enthusiastically. Yes, yes, Mace said, cheeks ruddy. Any improvement in readiness is welcome. The Lannisters might be cunning, but we'll meet them with sharpened swords. Some of our knights are fresh, but with your instruction, perhaps they'll catch the northern grit. Jon forced a small smile. He recalled how in the north, men honed themselves against the threat of dire winters and savage wildlings. Here in the Reach, the climate seemed gentler. He hoped that gentleness would not hamper them when steel clashed. Shortly after, Mace and the lords returned to supply issues, so Jon and Margaery excused themselves. The day wore on as they tended a dozen small tasks in Highgarden's labyrinth of corridors and offices. By evening, the war plans advanced another step, and the alliance's wheels turned more smoothly. Catelyn Stark, reviewing progress, expressed quiet satisfaction. We're building something that might truly stand, she told Jon privately. Your father would be proud. Jon's heart twisted at the thought of Ned, but he allowed himself to hold onto the notion that Ned's memory could guide them. Perhaps it was enough. Over the next few weeks, life in Highgarden fell into a wary rhythm. Dispatches arrived daily from the north, describing how Robb Stark maneuvered to keep Tywin Lannister pinned near Harrenhal while forging a potential link with the Riverlords. Caitlin sent back updates that House Tyrell was now cutting shipments to King's Landing and intensifying local defenses. Whispered rumors claimed that in the capital, Joffrey raged over bread shortages and that the Gold Cloaks struggled to contain unrest. Confirmation was elusive, but if true, it signaled that the blockade might be working. In the training yard, Jon worked tirelessly, demonstrating practical swordsmanship and sharing cautionary tales of skirmishes. Many young knights, initially dazzled by the ideal of martial honor, found his unromantic approach sobering. He insisted they learn to fight in a shield wall, to recognize cavalry charges, to adapt to ambushes. Now and again, Margaery observed from a distance, heart clenching at the thought of these men riding to real battle. Yet she admired Jon's dedication. His presence lent credibility to the war effort. Rumor had it that the Northern Wolf trained Tyrell's best. Outside the keep, Margaery pressed forward with efforts to calm local lords. She visited houses near Highgarden, accompanied by a small retinue. Ghost's imposing figure startled some, but Margaery's warmth won them over. She listened to concerns about harvest yields and roving bandits. Promising that House Tyrell's alignment with the North would bring security, she left them feeling less uncertain. By the time she returned, dusty and tired, she found Jon waiting in the courtyard. Even so, the specter of war never dimmed. Ravens sometimes brought dire tidings from the Riverlands, burned villages, raids by soldiers loyal to House Lannister. In turn, Lannister parties tested the edges of the Reach, scouting for weaknesses. A few small skirmishes occurred near Bitterbridge, with Tyrell outriders clashing against suspicious foes. Each incident stirred alarm. Margaery dreaded the day a full-scale battle erupted. She prayed it would not come to Highgarden's orchard. One mild afternoon, while finishing a training session with the knights, Jon was approached by a courier bearing House Stark's sigil. The man, panting from a long ride, delivered a sealed message from Robb. Jon opened it, scanning the lines, his face tensed. He dismissed the courier gently and hurried to find Margaery and Caitlin, who had been reviewing alliance documents in a side chamber. He burst in without preamble, apologizing only after their startled reactions. "What is it?" Margaery asked, seeing Jon's expression. He read the short letter aloud. To Jon Snow and Lady Caitlin, "We have fresh intelligence that Joffrey's court now knows of the Tyrell-Stark alliance. The Crown blames House Tyrell for withholding vital grain shipments and publicly condemns the North as rebels. A Lannister strike force has begun gathering near the Blackwater to march south, presumably to punish the Reach. Tywin remains engaged with me, so these forces must be commanded by other Lannisters, perhaps Kevin or the Kingsguard. They may attempt to set your fields ablaze, or even lay siege to Highgarden. The time has come for House Tyrell to move. If you can muster your men near Bitterbridge, we can coordinate an advance from the Riverlands. We must not let the Lannisters overrun your territory. I await your response. Robb Stark, King in the North." Caitlin closed her eyes, tension etched in her brow. "It's as we feared. The Lannisters will not stand idle while their capital starves. They strike at the source of the blockade." Margaery paled slightly but steadied herself. "Then we must gather our armies. Father has men at Bitterbridge, but not yet enough for a pitched battle against a large Lannister force. We may need to call on the lesser lords of the Reach more decisively." Jon nodded grimly. "Robb suggests a combined movement. The Lannisters can't fight both the North in the Riverlands and the Tyrells in the South without stretching themselves. If we strike first, we might drive them back." Caitlin rose from the table, smoothing her dress. "Let's find Lord Tyrell and Lady Olenna. We must finalize a plan at once. War truly knocks at the door now." They left in haste, seeking the Tyrell leadership. Mace Tyrell convened an immediate war council in Highgarden's main audience chamber. Attending were Lady Olenna, Margaery, Jon, Caitlin, several Tyrell bannermen, and a smattering of knights from the North who had accompanied Caitlin. The chamber buzzed with urgent debate. Lord Tarly, known for his stern discipline, advocated marching the entire Tyrell army to meet the threat. Others feared dividing forces might expose Highgarden. Olenna's voice cut through the cacophony. Let us not lose our heads. The letter states the Lannister strike force aims to punish us, not necessarily to hold our lands. We should gather a strong defensive host at Bitterbridge while we continue the blockade. If Robb's move from the Riverlands pinches Tywin, the Lannisters might be forced to pull back. Lord Tarly scowled. A purely defensive posture cedes the initiative. We should march a bold host to the Rose Road, block the Lannisters from even reaching Bitterbridge. Show them the Reach won't be so easily cowed. A younger bannerman chimed in, voice quivering with nerves. But if the Lannisters outmaneuver us, they could slip around to the Mander, burning farmland. Our advantage is in forcing them to commit to a direct confrontation near Bitterbridge, where we hold stronger supply lines. Mace Tyrell, face flushed, said, I see wisdom in both arguments. Perhaps a compromise. We station the main host at Bitterbridge but send swift cavalry to harass any Lannister vanguard on the Rose Road, slowing them until we can reinforce if needed. Jon exchanged a glance with Margaery. She gave him a slight nod, encouraging him to speak. He cleared his throat. I agree that dividing the army too thinly is risky, but if we do nothing, the Lannisters might rampage through farmland. A force of cavalry used for harassment could deter them from straying too far. Meanwhile, a solid central defense at Bitterbridge ensures we aren't lured away from our strong point. Lord Tarly measured Jon with a stern gaze but eventually nodded. A balanced approach. We'll need to ensure the cavalry is well led. I can command that group if it pleases Lord Tyrell. Mace waved a hand, half relieved. Yes, Tarly, you have the experience. I'll remain with the main host at Bitterbridge. We'll muster every able-bodied knight who can arrive quickly. We must stand prepared within a fortnight. Meanwhile, the Orchard and Highgarden remain our seat. If the Lannisters come close, we'll recall more men to defend. Olenna's cane tapped the floor. And ensure the smaller lords are compelled to supply what we need, horses, men, grain. We can't allow half measures now that war threatens our doorstep. Catelyn watched from beside Jon, arms folded. I'll send word to Robb that you're assembling a force at Bitterbridge. He'll time his moves accordingly. With luck, the Lannisters won't anticipate a two-front threat. With decisions made, the council dispersed in a flurry of activity, each lord or knight rushing to gather men, secure supplies, and finalize orders. Margaery stayed behind with Jon, Olenna, and Catelyn. They lingered near the chairs, tension crackling in the air. Margaery let out a trembling breath, her knuckles whitening on the table's edge. This is it, she said quietly. We've talked and planned for weeks, but now the real test begins. Our orchard, our farmland, could soon see blood. Jon rested a hand on her arm. We'll do everything to stop them before that. War has come, but we stand together. Olenna cleared her throat, eyes narrowed. You'd best keep your nerve, both of you. In war, couples are often separated. If it becomes necessary, Margaery might remain in Highgarden to oversee civilian matters while you, Jon, ride with the main host. Are you prepared for that? The prospect twisted at Margaery's heart. Jon felt it too, a pang of dread at the idea of parting again so soon. Still, he forced himself to remain resolute. If that is what's needed for the alliance to function, we'll abide. But we'll coordinate as best we can. Margaery swallowed. I want to do my part, but I can't abandon the orchard or the people who look to me for guidance. I also refuse to stand idle if our knights ride to battle. This is an impossible choice. Catelyn's voice softened with empathy. War seldom offers easy choices, but perhaps you can remain near the seat of power at Bitterbridge if the main host is stationed there. Should the Lannisters break through, you'd have a chance to retreat. And if negotiations or quick decisions are needed, you'd be close enough to manage them. Margaery nodded, relief mingling with concern. That might be wise. Father will be at Bitterbridge, so I can help him. Jon, you'll be free to maneuver as needed, perhaps leading or advising in the field. We'll not be far apart. Jon exhaled, thankful for small mercies. Better than the alternative. Let's hope we can stop the Lannisters before they come within sight of Highgarden's walls. Olenna's lips tightened. Best hope indeed. We must move swiftly. I suggest you each gather what you need. The marshalling begins tomorrow. They parted to undertake the final tasks. Margaery, her heart pounding, helped coordinate logistics, ensuring wagons of supplies would travel from Highgarden to Bitterbridge. Meanwhile, Jon oversaw weapons distribution, verifying that newly minted blades and spears were up to standard. Their shared vow had once seemed a personal bond. Now, it knit together entire forces, each moving in tandem against the looming Lannister threat. That night, in the hush of their private quarters, they met with a sense of fleeting intimacy that only war's approach can heighten. Margaery, doffing her day's attire, stood near the window, the moonlight tracing pale shapes across her figure. Jon stepped behind her, placing gentle hands on her arms. Through the open shutters, the orchard rustled with a midnight breeze. The knowledge that they might soon march away stirred an ache within them both. "Remember Winterfell's godswood?" Jon whispered, brushing a soft kiss to her temple. "The hush among the red leaves, the stillness when we pledged ourselves? Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine we're there again." Margaery leaned into him, letting her eyes drift shut. "I remember the vow, the sense that we stood on the edge of something vast. I never imagined it would lead us here, forging alliances, preparing for war." He turned her to face him, lips meeting in a soft collision of breath and longing. In that kiss, they poured the fears and hopes that had no place in the clamor of day. War might claim them, yet at least they had this moment. When they parted, Margaery reached up, stroking his cheek. "I fear what morning brings," she murmured, "but we'll stand firm. We owe it to those who trust us, and to your father's memory." Jon nodded, voice rough. "We do. Let's face dawn together." They moved to the bed, slipping under the blankets, hands entwined. Outside, the orchard sighed with the night air, but within the quiet chamber, they found respite in closeness and the promise that, no matter how the realm convulsed, their vow would endure. If there was any comfort in these dark times, it lay in that unwavering bond. They slept eventually, fitful yet comforted by each other's warmth. At first light, horns sounded across Highgarden. The yard bustled with men loading wagons, knights donning armor, squires rushing with saddles. The clang of metal underscored the tension in the air. Lord Tarly assembled his cavalry for the harassment strategy. Mace Tyrell prepared to lead the main host, with Margaery at his side to assist in strategic decisions. Jon would ride with a contingent that could respond flexibly, helping coordinate with the northern envoys. Lady Olenna, though old, managed to appear on a balcony to watch the march. She refused to travel with the army, opting to remain at Highgarden to oversee local defenses. "I'll guard this orchard if I must," she declared with typical bluntness. "Your father can handle the front, Margaery. Do not let him bungle it." Margaery embraced her grandmother, then climbed onto her horse, a mare named Evening Star. She wore practical riding garb, a dark green cloak embroidered subtly with the Tyrell rose. Jon, astride a sturdy brown gelding, approached from the ranks. Ghost padded beside him, prompting a few horses to snort nervously, but most had grown accustomed to the direwolf's presence. They exchanged a fleeting, tender look. Catelyn Stark, mounted nearby, noted their silent communication and smiled grimly. "We ride as one," she said to them, voice carrying. "Let the Lannisters face the unity they scorned." Mace Tyrell signaled, and the army began to file out. Rows of infantry in Tyrell green, cavalry with polished helms, banners snapping overhead. Among them rode a smaller group of northern men sent by Robb to help coordinate. Leading that group was a quiet soldier named Hallis, who had fought in the Riverlands. He would carry messages back to Robb. The line streamed through Highgarden's gates, onto the roads that led toward Bitterbridge. Farmers paused in the fields, lifting hats or bows in respect, though fear flickered in their eyes. They had seen armies march before, many of them for Robert's rebellion or other southern skirmishes. War was never gentle. Days of travel followed, the host moving steadily. The roads near Highgarden remained peaceful, but once they ventured beyond the central region, signs of unrest grew. A few times they encountered bandits who fled at the sight of the main army. Smoke in the distance hinted at burnt farmsteads or accidental fires. At each halt, Margaery and Jon went among the soldiers, encouraging them, ensuring order. At night, they camped in large encampments, pickets set in wide perimeters. Margaery found the routine taxing. Accustomed to the comforts of her castle, she adjusted to sleeping in tents and eating rations. Yet her determination never flagged. She oversaw the distribution of fresh water, insisted on checks for hygiene to prevent disease, and conferred with the quartermasters on supply lines. Jon, meanwhile, trained small squads in night watch procedures, taught them to remain vigilant for enemy scouts. Ghost prowled the edges of camp, unnerving any potential intruders. On the fourth evening, they reached Bitterbridge, where Tyrell bannermen had already gathered. The fortress at Bitterbridge rose over the wide waters of the Mander Crossing, its walls bristling with new defenses. A sprawling camp of thousands spread around it. Men from various corners of the Reach, plus a few from the north who had come south earlier as envoys. The bustle was immense, reminiscent of a tournament in more peaceful times, yet overshadowed by the knowledge that a true battle might loom. Mace Tyrell conferred with local lords, planning how to station the main force. Lord Tarly took charge of the cavalry detachments, scouting up and down the Rose Road for any sign of a Lannister column. Jon and Catelyn pitched in, sending ravens to Robb, describing the muster. Margaery found a measure of relief that the orchard fields were distant enough that if the worst came, at least Highgarden's immediate farmland might be spared. But that comfort did not quell her worry for the peasants who lived near Bitterbridge. While the main host formed ranks, Margaery and Jon took time to address morale. They walked amid the tents, speaking with foot soldiers, hearing their concerns. Some were fresh recruits, not even peasants but sons of small merchants. Others were hardened men who had fought in sporadic skirmishes. The presence of Margaery, the famed Tyrell daughter who refused to forsake her vow, and Jon, the northern warrior with a direwolf, lent a sense of unity. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they would stand a chance. After a week fortifying Bitterbridge, news came from Lord Tarly's outriders. A Lannister force had been spotted far up the Rose Road, slowly advancing south. Rough estimates put them at 6,000 strong, likely a mix of infantry and cavalry under someone's command, though Tywin himself remained in the Riverlands. The men wore the Lion's Sigil, carried banners of House Lannister, and marched in disciplined columns. Whether they aimed to attack or simply posture remained unknown. Mace Tyrell called a war council that night in the castle's stone hall. Flickering torches lit the old tapestries. Lords from across the Reach jostled for position at the table. Margaery stood near her father, Jon at her side, while Catelyn joined them. They listened as Lord Tarly described the scouting reports. "They're still days away, traveling at a measured pace," he said, frowning. "That means they're either waiting for more forces or they want to approach carefully. We have superior numbers, if all our bannermen stand firm." Mace Tyrell drummed his fingers on the table. "Then we should meet them in open field, force them to turn back. If they retreat, we can pursue. If they fight, we have the advantage of numbers and supply lines. The question is, do we wait for them to come near Bitterbridge, or do we march forward to intercept them?" Jon exchanged a glance with Margaery. She gave him a subtle nod. He spoke. "If we let them come close to Bitterbridge, we risk letting them scout for weaknesses. But if we march far out and they're more numerous than we suspect, we might be out of position. Perhaps a midpoint approach is best. We ride out partway, find ground suited for our advantage, and make them face us there." Lord Tarly nodded. "A carefully chosen battlefield can tip the scales. We have knights aplenty for a cavalry charge if the ground is favorable. Also, we can keep some men in reserve in case they feign retreat. The Lannisters are cunning. We must ensure we don't chase them into a trap." Catelyn raised a hand. "A sound plan, but be prepared to adjust. The Lannisters might only be testing your strength. If they see a large host, they could withdraw without a full battle. Then again, that might achieve our goal, driving them away from these lands. Mace Tyrell rubbed his chin. Yes, indeed. I prefer to push them back entirely. But ensuring minimal casualties must also matter. Very well, Tarly. Gather the cavalry. We'll form a vanguard and an infantry corps. I'll remain with the main force. Lady Margaery, you'll assist me in coordinating supply lines from Bitterbridge. Jon Snow, would you join the vanguard or remain with us? Jon's pulse quickened. He wanted to be in the thick of it to help shape the fight, but he also worried about staying close to Margaery. She caught his eye, a flicker of concern evident, but she pressed her lips together in a thin line and gave him a faint nod, as if to say, do what you must. He spoke calmly. I'll ride with Lord Tarly's vanguard. If we encounter the Lannisters first, I can relay messages swiftly back. Ghost can help sniff out hidden threats. Mace Tyrell nodded, relieved. Good. Then it's settled. Tomorrow we begin mustering outside the castle. The cavalry will ride to find suitable ground, with infantry following at a controlled pace. Let us hope the Lannisters see reason and turn tail. When the council broke, Margaery pulled Jon aside in a quiet corridor. The torchlight cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. She held his arm, voice low. You'll be out there again, risking your life. I want to beg you to stay here, but I know that's selfish. You're needed. Still, the thought of losing you. She bit her lip, eyes misting. He touched her cheek, heart heavy. I'll be careful. Promise. And if it comes to battle, I'll fight with everything I have. I'm no fool. I want to return to you. She leaned in, letting her forehead rest against his. Then go with the gods' protection. I'll do my part here, ensuring Father doesn't do anything reckless. Every time a raven arrives, I'll pray its word of your safety. They kissed, a gentle exchange that held the weight of all the unspoken fears. In the hush of that corridor, they found a measure of solace. Beyond, war beckoned. The next dawn, the cavalry marched out in a cloud of dust, sabers clanking. Jon rode near Lord Tarly, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. Ghost loped alongside, eliciting wary glances but also quiet respect. Behind them, at a measured distance, columns of Tyrell infantry followed. The Rose Road stretched ahead, winding toward the uncertain threat of Lannister steel. Days later, the vanguard reached rolling plains. Scouts relayed that the Lannister force was not far off, perhaps a day's ride. Lord Tarly ordered the men to set up a temporary camp, a forward position from which to assess the terrain. They discovered a low ridge near a bend in the Rose Road, flanked by gentle slopes and patches of scrub. A decent spot for a defensive stance if needed. Tarly's cavalry patrolled the perimeter, while the rest dug shallow fortifications and readied for possible engagement. Night fell under tense silence. Jon, seated by a small fire, sharpened his sword with methodical strokes. The men around him spoke in hushed voices. Some boasted bravado, others offered silent prayers. Ghost rested at Jon's feet, ears twitching at every distant sound. The faint rustle of wind across the plains reminded Jon of nights spent in the north, the hush before a storm. He gazed at the flickering flames, imagining Margaery's face. Would this be the turning point? Before dawn, watchmen sounded an alarm. Lannister scouts spotted. Men tumbled from tents, arming themselves. Tarly barked orders, sending outriders to push back the scouts and prevent them from mapping the entire camp. A skirmish ensued in the dim pre-dawn glow, shadows clashing at the edge of the ridge. Jon rode out with a handful of cavalry, intercepting one group of Lannister riders. Steel flashed. Ghost darted in, knocking a horse off balance. Jon's sword took down a startled foe. The rest scattered, leaving 2 dead behind. When the sun rose, the battered survivors of the Lannister scouts retreated to rejoin their main force. Tarly surveyed the horizon from the ridge. They know we're here, he muttered. They'll either come at us soon or try to skirt around. We must hold this position until the main host arrives. By midday, dust clouds on the northern horizon signaled the approach of the Lannister column. The watchers' hearts pounded. Jon clenched the reins, Ghost snarling softly at his side. Tarly kept the cavalry half hidden behind the ridge, preparing for a possible charge. Their plan was to let the Lannisters see some of the Tyrell forces, hopefully luring them close enough to commit. Meanwhile, a messenger galloped back to warn Mace Tyrell that battle might be imminent. As the Lannister host drew nearer, the lion banners were plainly visible. Perhaps 6,000 or 7,000 men, but some might have lagged behind. Jon's pulse thundered. He'd faced Lannisters in skirmishes before, but this felt grander, 2 armies bracing for collision. Would they attack outright or seek to negotiate? War seldom welcomed parley. The Lannisters deployed in partial formation across the plains, a wave of red and gold. Jon spied knights in half armor, lines of spearmen, horse archers. A standard-bearer flew a large lion banner. Another rider carried a lesser banner, marking a commander. Through his vantage, he noticed their slow movement, as though they were assessing the Tyrell position. Perhaps they realized the Tyrell vanguard was not alone, that more men likely waited behind. Time stretched, neither side advanced. Tarly quietly ordered a small cavalry group to feign a forward move, testing the Lannister reaction. The Lannisters responded by shifting their lines, archers knocking arrows. A few arrows sailed harmlessly, and the Tyrell cavalry withdrew. It was a tense standoff, each force measuring the other's strength. Jon breathed slowly to steady himself, scanning for any sign of a flanking maneuver. War seldom ended without bloodshed, but maybe the Lannisters would hesitate. Morning bled into afternoon. A messenger from Mace Tyrell arrived, panting, reporting that the main Tyrell force was marching at haste, expected by nightfall or the next dawn. Tarly nodded curtly, instructing the men to hold defensive positions. The Lannisters, apparently cautious, made no bold move, though they inched nearer, as if daring the Tyrells to strike first. This silent dance of armies felt like lightning waiting for the thunderclap. When twilight arrived, the plains shimmered under an orange sky. The 2 forces remained locked in place, each reluctant to commit fully. Soldiers lit fires in respective camps. Scouts roamed the perimeter, ensuring no surprise assault. Jon spent the night dozing fitfully in armor, Ghost prowling restlessly. The tension was nearly unbearable. He wondered if Margaery, far behind, knew how close the armies were to clashing. Possibly another day might see them locked in open battle. Was there a chance the Lannisters would retreat? At dawn, horns sounded from the south. A wave of relief swept through Tarly's men as the main Tyrell host appeared on the horizon, banners fluttering. Leading them was Mace Tyrell, flanked by several highborn knights. Behind marched ranks of infantry and contingents from various houses. The combined might of the Reach had arrived, swelling the Tyrell lines to well over 10,000. Catelyn Stark was there too, riding with Margaery near the center. Jon glimpsed Margaery's form from afar, her banner trailing in the breeze. Relief flooded him that she'd come safely, though worry for her lingered. The Lannisters, now outnumbered, might attempt to fight, retreat, or sue for a parley. For a time, they drew their lines back, possibly waiting for orders. Mace Tyrell's arrival emboldened the Tyrell ranks. Lord Tarly rode to greet Mace with Jon at his side. They met near the ridge, exchanging quick updates. Mace's face gleamed with perspiration, tension in his eyes. "They haven't attacked?" Tarly shook his head. "No, they posture, likely waiting to see if we'd commit. Now that you're here with superior force, we might press them to yield or flee." Mace spat. "Let them flee. We can chase them all the way to the Blackwater if need be." Catelyn and Margaery approached. Margaery's gaze swept over Jon, relief plain in her face. Catelyn spoke sharply. "Be cautious, Lord Tyrell. A cornered lion can lash out viciously. Perhaps we should offer terms. Demand they withdraw from the Reach or face battle." Mace wavered. Tarly scowled. But Margaery said softly, "We stand for an end to Lannister aggression, not needless slaughter. Let us send riders with a demand. Retreat and cease harassing our lands, or face the consequences." Tarly shrugged. "We can attempt it, though I doubt they'll yield easily." but it might buy time to deploy our lines advantageously. Mace nodded. Very well, I'll dispatch a herald. Jon exhaled. At least they would attempt reason. He stayed with Margaery as the herald rode forward under a banner of truce, delivering Tyrell demands. The Lannister lines parted, letting the herald approach a knight who seemed to command. From a distance, Jon couldn't make out words. Tension thickened. Half an hour passed. The herald returned, face grim, bearing a refusal. They say the crown decrees House Tyrell must resume shipments or face punishment for treason. They will not withdraw unless we end the blockade and pledge fealty to King Joffrey. Mace Tyrell's jaw tightened. Tarly cursed. Catelyn pressed her lips into a thin line. We cannot yield to that. The war is set. Lord Tarly turned to Mace. Shall we form up for battle? Our men outnumber them. Let us drive them from the reach once and for all. Margaery's throat bobbed. She placed a hand on Jon's forearm, speaking in a tight whisper. Stay safe, you two, father. Let's do what must be done. But remember, each life lost is a tragedy. Mace gave her a stiff nod. I'll lead the main lines. Tarly, take your cavalry on the left flank. Jon, you may join him or coordinate from the ridge. Margaery, you remain here with the command staff. Should we need to adjust, we'll send messages. Thus, the Tyrell host prepared for open battle. Thousands of swords glinted under the rising sun. Horns blared. Drums thudded. The Lannisters responded in kind, forming ranks, archers behind infantry, cavalry on their flanks. Dust rose from the plain as each side advanced in measured steps. A hush of finality settled. Negotiation had failed. War demanded blood. Jon parted from Margaery with a lingering glance. She raised her chin, eyes reflecting both fear and faith. He spurred his horse to join Tarly's flank. Ghost raced alongside. The pounding of hooves rattled Jon's bones as they positioned themselves, adrenaline coursing. He tightened his grip on the sword's hilt. This was it. He recalled Ned's last words, how family and duty must endure. For Margaery, for the orchard, for all who had suffered under Lannister tyranny, he would fight. Across the field, Lannister horns blared. The lines surged. Tyrell infantry marched forward, spears leveled. The Lannister front braced. Tarly's cavalry thundered, seeking to sweep the Lannister left flank. Arrows whistled overhead, men screaming as they fell. Chaos erupted in that instant. Steel clashing, horses whinnying in panic, dust swirling, war cries echoing. Jon rode with Tarly's vanguard, blade raised. They crashed into Lannister cavalry. Ghost lunged at a mounted foe, toppling him with savage force. The clang of swords on shields surrounded Jon. He parried one blow, thrust at another knight's flank, unseating him. Blood spattered. A Lannister spearman lunged for Jon's horse. Jon twisted aside, Ghost snapping at the man's leg. The rider behind Jon hammered the spearman's skull with a mace. Bodies littered the ground. The stench of sweat and terror thickened. Somewhere behind, Tyrell infantry advanced in formation, pressing the Lannister center. On the far right, Mace Tyrell himself led a contingent bellowing orders. The Lannisters fought fiercely, refusing to break. Archers loosed volleys that scythed down men on both sides. Jon glimpsed a hail of arrows slicing the sky, slamming into the cavalry near him. He guided his horse to dodge, though one arrow grazed his shoulder. Pain flared. He gritted his teeth, pressing on. Time lost meaning in the maelstrom. Tarly's voice boomed, rallying men to push deeper into the Lannister flank. Jon followed the surging cavalry, cutting through pockets of resistance. The Lannisters slowly gave ground, yet refused to collapse. A knight in golden armor lunged at Jon with surprising skill, their blades meeting in a flurry of sparks. Ghost prowled at the knight's side, snarling. In a final clash, Jon forced the knight's sword aside, delivering a blow to the chest. The knight toppled, gasping as blood stained his tabard. Jon swallowed revulsion, spurring onward. At last, it seemed the Lannister left flank began to crumble under the cavalry assault. Shouts of retreat rippled. Tarly signaled the men not to chase too far, wary of a trap. Meanwhile, at the center, the Tyrell infantry battered the Lannister line. Mace Tyrell's presence lent morale. The lion banner wavered. A swirl of dust obscured all but shapes. Men died by the dozen. War's cruelty left no illusions. Soon, the Lannister center faltered, some units peeling back. The right flank, seeing the left broken, also withdrew. The horns of retreat sounded. The field, sodden with blood and strewn with the fallen, belonged to House Tyrell. A ragged cheer rose among the survivors. The Lannisters pulled back, leaving their dead and dying behind. Tarly reined in, breath heaving. Jon halted, chest pounding, scanning for any sign of a new threat. When none came, the battered Tyrell forces regrouped. The cavalry circle parted to let the infirm gather. Corpses littered the plain, Lannister and Tyrell alike. Groans of the wounded punctured the triumphant shouts. A messenger from Mace Tyrell galloped up. Lord Mace says the Lannisters are in full retreat northward. He orders the cavalry to chase them as far as the next ridge but not risk ambush. The day is ours. Jon sat slumped in the saddle, exhaustion washing over him. He wiped blood-spattered sweat from his brow. Ghost emerged from the dust, panting, muzzle smeared with gore. Jon reached down, placing a trembling hand on the direwolf's neck. They had survived. The orchard, for now, was safe, but so many had fallen. He felt no joy, only a hollow relief that the Lannisters were driven back. Following Tarly's command, part of the cavalry advanced to ensure the Lannisters kept retreating. Jon joined them at a careful pace, though weariness gnawed. They rode half a league before confirming the foe had scattered. Satisfied, they returned to the battlefield. The sight was grim. Wounded men crying out, medics trying to stanch wounds, friends searching for the lost. Margaery's vow of peace felt fragile here among the gore-soaked dust. Yet victory had been won. Eventually, at the center of the field, Jon dismounted, stiff with fatigue, and found Margaery picking her way through the carnage, face pale, accompanied by a few guards. They had arrived with fresh medics to help the wounded. When their eyes met, she ran to him, ignoring the blood caking his armor. He caught her in a fierce embrace. She gasped softly at the spatter of gore, but relief flooded her expression. "You live," she managed, tears forming. "Gods, I prayed so hard." Jon's voice cracked. "I'm alive. We won." The Lannisters pulled back. "But it's a horror, Margaery. So many died." She pressed her cheek to his chest, heart hammering. "War is monstrous, but you're here. We'll treat the wounded, bury the dead, and we'll hold the orchard. We must keep faith." He kissed her hair, the ache of loss mingling with the solace of her presence. "We will. This was only one battle, though. The Lannisters won't surrender so easily." She nodded, eyes somber. "No, they won't. But if each victory pushes them further from our lands, it's a step toward the realm's freedom." Together, they moved among the survivors, giving what comfort they could. Lord Tarly methodically organized the disposal of bodies. Mace Tyrell oversaw the muster, ensuring the battered Tyrell lines remained coherent. Catelyn Stark helped gather intelligence on the Lannister casualties. The grim aftermath reminded them that even a well-fought victory carried a brutal cost. That night, fires burned across the plain as the living tried to sleep among memories of violence. Jon and Margaery found a quiet spot near the ridge, out of sight of the worst carnage. They shared a simple meal with Catelyn, exchanging low words about the next steps. The alliance had been tested by blood, proven in a field of death. Each heart carried a scar from what they'd seen. In the days that followed, Tyrell scouts confirmed the Lannister force retreated fully toward the Blackwater, presumably rejoining other Crown forces. The Rose Road lay clear, though the risk of another incursion remained. Mace Tyrell debated pushing deeper, but Catelyn advised caution until a plan with Robb Stark could be coordinated. Ultimately, they decided to hold the ground, secure the region, and keep up the blockade. The orchard fields, at least for now, were spared a second wave of devastation. By the time the army returned to Bitterbridge for rest, the men carried themselves with a battered pride. They had faced the lion's wrath and emerged standing. Margaery oversaw efforts to treat wounded survivors, carefully distributing supplies. Jon aided where he could, though the horrors of war haunted him. Some nights he woke in cold sweats, recalling the blood. Margaery, too, found sleep elusive. She dreamed of flames consuming the orchard, hearing the screams of the dying. Yet amid that darkness, they found comfort in each other. Each dawn, they rose, still bound by their vow, forging hope. Letters from Robb brought cautious congratulations. The North commended Tyrell bravery. Another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Slowly, the Lannister grip on the realm loosened, though it was far from broken. War still raged in the Riverlands, and King's Landing had not fallen. Life at Bitterbridge thus became the new center of Alliance operations. Margaery learned how to lead in a war camp, bridging the gap between soldier and peasant concerns. Jon remained at her side, or at times rode with scouting parties to ensure no fresh Lannister incursion threatened. The orchard fields behind them gave silent testimony to why they fought. Each time Margaery gazed south, she pictured Highgarden, its gardens in the bloom of summer's end, and felt the urging to defend that beauty from the ravages of a tyrant's war. One afternoon, she and Jon strolled along the battlements of Bitterbridge's old castle keep. Archers stood at intervals keeping watch. A mild breeze stirred Margaery's cloak, and she turned to Jon with a wistful smile. "Do you remember telling me about the northern snows?" she asked, voice subdued. "How cold they can be, yet how they shine in the moonlight." Jon blinked at the abrupt shift in topic but nodded. "Yes, winters in the north are harsh beyond words, yet strangely beautiful." She sighed. "I wonder if our orchard could ever see that kind of snow, or if it would kill the trees. Different worlds, yet we stand together. War might separate us from normal life, but I cling to the thought that one day we might walk in Winterfell's yard or Highgarden's orchard without fear." He placed a hand over hers. "We fight for that dream of peace, of home. We have to believe it's possible. If we let despair swallow us, the Lannisters have already won." She searched his eyes. "Then I'll keep believing, even if the road is long." They gazed out across the fortress walls, the sky tinted with the promise of dusk. Banners fluttered below, men moving about their tasks. In that moment, the orchard seemed distant, but they held it in their hearts. The orchard's promise of life, the vow that bound a northern wolf to a southern rose. Such a vow had carried them through betrayal, captivity, battles, and heartbreak. However many storms still lay ahead, they faced them as one.